Well, today's budget has been flagged up by some as the Chancellor's green budget. He's announced a shake-up of vehicle excise duty, which will mean drivers of gas-guzzling cars will pay a top rate of £210. Owners of the least polluting cars won't have to pay at all, though that applies to very few cars. Tom Simons has been getting reaction from drivers in Leicester. Tom.
Yes, George, in this budget tinged with green, Gordon Brown said this was a radical shake-up of the system of car tax. Now, it used to be that if you bought a small car like this, you would pay the same as if you went for a very large model like this one. But the Chancellor is very, very clearly trying to persuade us to consider something smaller.
Meet Rachel Hayes, busy mum of three with a very big car. There's no denying her 4x4 is a gas guzzler. It churns out 2.5 times the carbon dioxide of the cleanest cars. And if she were to buy a new one tomorrow, it would fall into a new super polluting tax band with a bill of up to £215 a year. On the school run, she wouldn't be without it.
Good boy. Well done. That's excellent.
But she denies it's a Chelsea tractor. This is rural Leicestershire after all. So will Gordon Brown's new taxes stop her buying big in future?
No, it won't make a difference. I have 3 children. I travel on the back roads every day for the school run, and no other vehicle is practical for me.
That is the keys for your vehicle?
As Gordon Brown was sitting down this afternoon, William Richardson was picking up his new hybrid petrol-electric car. It's green, but not green enough to make it into the new tax-free band announced today. William will pay £40 a year, but he believes that makes a difference.
It's incredibly valuable, especially as that one of the reasons why I bought the car was because it was in a lower bracket anyway, and for it to now be pushed into a £40 bracket, it's much, much better.
So, could this be called a green budget? Here's the plus side, £50 million for green technology like solar power for schools. And the climate change levy imposed on industries that use a lot of energy will go up in line with inflation. But environmentalists are dismayed that taxes on air passengers won't be increased. And fuel tax for cars has been frozen until at least September. So perhaps Brown is turning very slightly green, offering rewards here and there, but the amount of money he was playing with was relatively small. When it comes to motoring in particular, minds are extremely difficult to change.
But as always with budgets, the devil is very much in the detail. The ban that includes these off-roaders is quite large. It has lots of large family cars in it, so it's not just 4x4s, and that may confuse some drivers. And the greenest band, the free tax band, well, that only has 2 models in it. And drivers I've spoken to have said they can be very difficult to find in the marketplace. George.
Tom, thank you.
Well, now to other measures in today's budget. They include raising the stamp duty threshold for home buyers to £125,000. And for those trying to get on the property ladder, there'll be £970 million for a shared equity scheme.
But it's not such good news for pensioners. The Chancellor hasn't renewed a £200 rebate on council tax for the elderly.
And of course, there's duty. A freeze on petrol, but 9p on a packet of cigarettes. And mixed news for drinkers. Spirits stay frozen, but there's an increase of 4p on a bottle of wine and a penny on a pint of beer.
Well, let's get more now from our political editor, Nick Robinson, and our economics editor, Evan Davis. Evan, if I could come to you first. Plenty more money then for schools. Who are going to be the losers?
Well, you know who it is? I think it's the other ministers, actually. We're in a new era, we're entering a new era, very tight public spending. And it means every time you hear a chancellor promise more money to one department, there's some other minister there sitting there thinking that means less money for me. And we're going to see very tough conditions, I think, for some of the departments like Revenue and Customs, the administration of benefits, where we're going to have blokes in clipboards running around trying to work out how they can be made more efficient in order to give some protection to the budgets of health and education.
Evan, tell me, has he raised any money through extra taxes?
Not really. This was a very, very neutral budget. Taxes are creeping up as the economy grows. In fact, the tax burden is entering record terrain. We're not quite there yet, but we are getting towards record levels. And I think the Chancellor thought the public won't stomach another big tax rise. Very different to 4 years ago in the budget then. He put up taxes for the health service. Everybody said, God bless the Chancellor, he's done what we all wanted. The Chancellor didn't think he'd get that reaction this time, and I think he decided better to hold back on the tax front. Cut waste, that's going to have to pay for education rather than the tax rise.
All right, Nick, if I could come to you now. What did this clash today in the Commons tell us, do you think, about post-Blair politics?
Well, the clash mattered, of course, George, because the Chancellor, as we were hearing, had no money to spend and not much money to raise either. He'd done that just a few weeks ago. So this was the political equivalent of the big fight. And the Chancellor had been so frustrated that he's had to take the blows from Crusher Cameron, calling him the roadblock to reform. And today, Bruiser Brown said in reply, actually, he's the same old Tory. He's a slasher of spending. He wants us to ask the Tories, would you match this education spending or not? But of course we're going to pose a question back to him, Gordon Brown, and say, you didn't tell us when you'd raise this money, you didn't tell us how you'd raise this money, you didn't tell us actually how much money you'd raise for schools. But we've seen today the shape of the new battle to come, which allows everybody around Westminster to say, I wonder when the battle will actually commence.
Nick, Evan, thank you both. And you can find full details of Gordon Brown's budget on the BBC website, including guides, analysis and a chance to put your questions to a panel of experts. The address is bbc.co.uk/budget.
In the rest of the day's news, the trial of 7 British men accused of planning terrorist attacks in Britain has been told they discussed bombing London nightclubs and shopping centres, including Bluewater in Kent. The court also heard one of the defendants had attempted to buy a radioactive bomb. Daniel Sanford has been following the day's events.
The men accused of planning to bomb Britain arrived at the Old Bailey in a high-security van for the second day of their trial. The 7 defendants, aged 19 to 33, listened from behind a thick glass screen as the prosecution claimed their plot was reaching a conclusion in March 2004. But MI5 and the police were watching the suspects as they visited internet cafes, including this one in Slough, and bugging them in their homes and cars. Javad Akbar was apparently recorded discussing targets like gas and electricity supplies and the biggest nightclub in central London. No one can put their hands up and say they are innocent, those slags dancing around. I think the club thing you could do, but the gas would be much harder. The prosecution say Wahid Mahmood mentioned the huge Bluewater shopping centre as a possible target. A little explosion at Bluewater, tomorrow if you want. I don't know how big it would be, we haven't tested it, but we could do one tomorrow. Salahuddin Amin was in Pakistan, where he's alleged to have exchanged emails with the British cell about the correct ratios to make the explosives. While in Pakistan, he was apparently also involved in a plot to buy a radioisotope bomb, a dirty bomb from the Russian mafia, though he later told police he didn't think that scheme was likely to work. The defendants bought more than 0.5 ton of ammonium nitrate from this supplier in West Sussex, enough to fertilise 5 football pitches. They kept it at this storage depot in West London, but what they didn't know was the police were onto them, substituting the fertiliser for a substance that can't be used to make explosives. Meanwhile, the men were still being bugged. At one point, discussion of the Madrid bombings was recorded. Wahid Mahmood said, Spain was a beautiful job, weren't it? Absolutely beautiful, man. So much impact. The men deny all the charges. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at the Old Bailey.
A time check, and it's 18 minutes past 6.
A reminder of tonight's top stories.